CNN's Rick Salinger is standing by in eastern Saudi Arabia today. Hello, Rick. What do you know for us?
Well, the main concern here, and perhaps throughout much of the Middle East, has been one word, and that is Scud. Latest word we have here is that the RAF, the Royal Air Force, the Brits, have been successful in locating some more of those mobile Scud launchers, and they are in the process right now of trying to wipe them out. Meantime, more fighting is occurring along the ground at the northern Saudi Arabian border with Kuwait near Khafji. What is happening there, we are told, is that 40 Iraqis have been killed in fighting with U.S. Marines. However, in the process, 4 Marines have been injured, one of them seriously, with shrapnel wounds. Also here in eastern Saudi Arabia, we are getting word from the U.S. consulate that those who may want to leave will be allowed to do so on military airlift flights that are being arranged for the civilian population. Now, these are for U.S. citizens and their dependents from Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. No date has been set yet for the flights, and it is available only to those here in the eastern province with valid exit visas and those who are willing to pay the cost of the flight plus a premium that will be attached to it. While Saddam Hussein has not been successful in staging a successful attack on Saudi Arabia with his Scud missiles, you know there was one attempt the other night, but it was intercepted by a U.S. Patriot missile, he has been successful in putting a scare into a lot of people. Many felt that they were safe here, they were told they would be safe, but just in case they want to leave, a voluntary departure is now being arranged. Live from eastern Saudi Arabia, I'm Rick Salinger, CNN.
Okay, Rick, we'll be checking back in with Rick Salinger. Rick?
We continue to draw on the experience of former government officials for insight into the fast-breaking events in the Gulf War. Howard Teicher was Senior Director for Political and Military Affairs at the National Security Council during the Reagan administration. Good morning, Mr. Teicher.
Morning.
I want to set up a fairly long question for you to begin with this morning, sir. There are fears in many quarters today of an expansion of this war. Algeria's ruling party today urged all Arab nations to fight immediately on the side of Iraq. Iran should enter the war, this according to a member of parliament. We have had spokespersons for Jordan say that if Israel violates their airspace, they will be in the war. What are we looking at? Is this scenario as scary as it possibly seems?
Well, the scenario is certainly as scary as you suggest. We can't rule out the prospect that the war could be widened, that other countries could get involved. I think we have to be careful in the case of Algeria. This is a statement by the ruling party, not an action by the government or governing bodies. I think it's clear that pressure is going to continue to mount in Arab countries. The prospects for terrorism are sure to increase. And I do think we have to gird ourselves for unexpected, nasty developments in the Middle East, in Europe, and perhaps elsewhere. But I don't think we should automatically respond to every statement we hear or cries from the street calling for violence against America or a widening of the war. It's easy to talk about widening the war. It's much more difficult to make it happen.
All right, a lot of this is tied to the possible retaliation against Iraq by Israel for the now 2 missile attacks against Israel. And Israel has indicated that they will indeed, at some point in time, retaliate. What form do you think that might take, and what effect will it have on the war if it does indeed happen?
Well, of course, it's going to be very difficult for the Israelis to retaliate in the current circumstances or to actually achieve military objectives that would have political significance. They cannot be as up-to-date in terms of real-time tactical military intelligence as the coalition forces are. The target sets that they would most likely go after have probably been destroyed unless they have some special information that they have not shared with the coalition forces that would enable them to go after the mobile launchers or the mobile launch depots where masses of the TELs might be located. It's hard to see how they could hit targets with significant short-term tactical significance. Moreover, it's important to remember when the Israelis hit Iraq in 80, 81 and took out the reactor, they flew secretly in over Saudi Arabia. They achieved an element of strategic and tactical surprise. It's going to be very difficult, notwithstanding the bravado of the Israeli Air Force, to achieve the kinds of results that they would like to achieve without engaging the Jordanians, perhaps even the Syrians, and they certainly won't be able to use Saudi airspace. So I think we may see some sort of surprise by the Israelis, perhaps something using commando forces, perhaps something that we can't predict or can't anticipate. I think they'll continue to show restraint in the short term, though.
As a possible surprise, let me put this to you. What do you know of Israel's missiles, their capability, and do you think that might be a possibility, rather than violating anyone's airspace with fighters or bombers, to shoot a missile directly at Baghdad?
Well, that's a possibility. I don't think that the Israelis have the range to strike Baghdad, and I don't think, notwithstanding the fact that the Iraqi posture is clearly one of trying to terrorize the Israelis in order to draw them into the war, that they will be drawn in that way. The tactical missiles that Israel has are of the tactical battlefield type. At best, they could reach western Iraq, and again, the precision of those missiles is not very great at those distances. So I don't think you should expect that to be the most likely response, although it's certainly a possibility. They're much more likely to use their Air Force to ensure that they can take out whatever targets they're willing to go after, because they know they will pay a political price in the region and in their relationship with the U.S. and Western Europe.
Let's talk about Saddam Hussein's strategy at this point. So far, his retaliatory strikes have been primarily anti-aircraft guns against the coalition planes going into Iraq, and two very ineffective missile strikes against Israel. What do you think his strategy is at this point?
I think Saddam has started to draw the conclusion that the will of the coalition is much greater than he anticipated, and that he is not going to be able to achieve the types of military successes that he had hoped or assumed, given the experience that he had with the Iranians. He's going to try to draw Israel in. He's going to try to break up this coalition. He will try to use terrorism, which he may believe, as was the case in Lebanon, can weaken our will, weaken our resolve, turn attention away from combat and what he did to start this war, more onto a more introspective American and Western attitude that weakens our resolve. By bringing the Israelis in, of course, he probably forces the Syrians out, which creates a modest political problem in the Arab world. I don't think it will be decisive. He needs to survive and somehow show that he stood up to the West and the Israelis and widen the war. I don't think he'll succeed. I think that the coalition will be able to finish him off, eliminate his offensive military capabilities, and bring about a change in regime in Baghdad.
Thank you very much for sharing your insight into this war at this early hour of the morning. Mr. Howard Teicher, formerly Senior Director for Political and Military Affairs at the National Security Council. Thank you again, sir. Molly?
Thank you.
War has brought a quantum jump in security consciousness in the United States. Bomb scares have police in New York and Los Angeles scurrying, although no bombs have been found. Immigration officials are looking up Iraqi nationals for questioning. Airports are intensifying baggage searches and leavening access to flight gates. At the National Football Conference game in Buffalo, New York tomorrow, one report says the FBI is posting counter-terrorist agents.
And updating the story as we now know it and the developing parts of the story of the war in the Gulf, all international journalists in Baghdad are being told they have to leave. Iraqi officials say conditions are not right for reporters to be in the capital. Israeli authorities say Israel will respond to a second Scud missile attack in as many days. The Israeli Defense Force says several missiles fell on Tel Aviv this morning. At least 10 people were hurt in the attack. Avi Posner, a senior advisor to Israel's prime minister, tells CNN the strike will be answered, but gave no details on how or when. Israeli entry into the war could crack the anti-Iraq coalition, something Washington hopes to avoid. President Bush was awakened this morning and told of the attack. He has asked Israel to let the United States and other Gulf allies take out the Scud missile launchers, but the Israelis say if the United States cannot take care of the missiles, Israel will.
And that is the very latest news from war in the Gulf. Thanks, everybody. I'm Molly McCoy.
And I'm Rick Moore. We're at the CNN Center in Atlanta. The International Correspondents is coming up next. And join us at the top of the hour for more Gulf War developments. We'll take a close-up look at the stealth fighter. Stay tuned.
From CNN's Washington Bureau, the International Correspondents, the world as others see it.
Welcome to the International Correspondents. I'm Bob Franken in Washington. For the second time in 2 days, air raid sirens wailed in Israel as Iraqi missiles slammed into the Jewish state. As in Friday's attack, there were injuries, but none appeared serious. But the political fallout may be more significant. A senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir told CNN that the Iraqi attack will be answered. An Israeli military response is likely to test the international coalition arrayed against Iraq. At the same time, the relentless Allied air attacks against Iraq continue. Joining us in this live edition of the International Correspondents to discuss the Gulf War are Hisham Melhem, who writes for the Lebanese newspaper As-Safar, Martin Walker, Washington correspondent for The Guardian of Great Britain, and Mario Diedrichs of Germany's Stern magazine, and via satellite from a Tel Aviv rooftop, CNN's Richard Roth. Welcome. And Richard, how likely do you believe, actually I guess the question is, when do you anticipate there will be an Israeli response?
I would have no way of knowing that. We know that the government spokesman there said that Israel would respond within the last hour. A brigadier general of the Israeli Defense Force hinted that Israel might respond, but said it will be how and when will be up to Israel.
When do you think that we can expect a response, Mario?
Well, I don't know either. I mean, it's very hard to judge.
I guess the question really is sooner or later?
From what I understand, it will be rather sooner than later. However, I just do not see what an Israeli air raid can add to retaliation against Iraq, while every day there are more than 1,000 sorties going on.
Hisham?
I think they will react sooner, but I think I agree that it's militarily speaking, it will be meaningless in a way. A bad situation will be made worse. It seems to me Saddam Hussein's gamble now that he knows that militarily speaking the die is cast, politically he's trying to mobilize support in the Arab world, and I think he will take heart from those demonstrations in Algeria. And with the passing of each day, one could see that he is beginning to make inroads.
Martin?
Well, by all precedent, Israel should have reacted, should have retaliated by now, but these are unprecedented times. And I think the most striking feature of these missile attacks is how militarily useless they have been. They have made, I think they've caused something like 30 casualties. They have, in effect, had a minimum of damage, but a maximum of political effect. And I think rather than being aimed at military targets, what we've seen here is a strike directly at the political weak point of the coalition, the alliance, the support of America's coalition partners.
With a lot of psychological fallout and perhaps a lot more depending on what the response is. We have to take a break here. We'll return and we'll probably start off again with Richard Roth in just a moment. One of the most chilling things about all of this is that as you watch the coverage and you watch the people who are involved over there putting on their gas masks in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, you can feel the fear that must be throughout the country. And there must be a tremendous pressure, Richard Roth, within Israel to do something back to Iraq.
Yes, within the hour, the Israeli Defense Force spokesman said that Israel has the right to protect itself and that Iraq is trying to drag Israel into the conflict. He said Israel was prepared for this. He said that the motivation is low right now in Iraq, and the lower it goes, the higher attempts by Iraq to involve Israel go. If they are suffering in Iraq, they are going to lash out at Israel to try to widen this conflict. The people on the street, people who are affected by what's happening, certainly many of them are very scared and worried. Some do say that the government should wait and not retaliate. Others have said that they expect the Israeli army, which they call the best in the world here, should go in and attack Iraqi missile sites in western Iraq.
Do you feel, those of you who have had some experience in the Middle East, do you feel that Israel will be able to resist the temptation to react?
Well, I hope so, because if Israel does react at this stage, they're playing directly into Saddam Hussein's hands. And the other problem is that it's kind of hard to see how Israel can react without widening the war even further by crossing Syrian or Jordanian airspace.
Can Israel really contribute anything militarily to the campaign against Saddam Hussein?
Absolutely not. If they will intervene, they'll probably intervene also for political purposes, and also to show that that we are still reliable, that the United States cannot do without us in the Middle East. But I think you're going to have a new phenomenon, a new development in which if the Israelis attack on a massive scale, this will seem to many ordinary Arabs as the Israelis with other Arab countries and the United States attacking Iraq. And I think you will see more demonstrations in the streets. It has really nothing to do with what certain Arab governments want or say. We are talking about different shifting views on the part of the people.
But Richard, don't the Israelis to some degree feel like sitting ducks as long as they don't react, that Saddam Hussein really has a free shot at them?
They do feel that way, and they are expecting their government to respond. As you mentioned earlier, it's somewhat miraculous that no one has been killed as a direct result of the missile hits. Several people have been asphyxiated because of improper usage of their gas mask. And some people perhaps might say that considering the minor toll, considering not the psychological toll, but the physical toll, that Israel should continue to wait it out, and perhaps the U.S. and British forces would knock out those Scud launchers. But certainly everyone feels like a sitting duck. Those who, if you can get any sleep, it's usually an hour at a time. The nighttime is definitely the worst, and we had several alarms go off based on other reasons, and during the night, and everyone goes into these sealed rooms. And I can tell you that the sealed rooms I've been in, though, people are not angry or upset or saying, let's go back at them. They're just like waiting it out. That's the mood here.
May I ask you something? When you mentioned...
This is Mario Dietrich's talking.
Yeah, Mario Dietrich here. When you mentioned that the Israeli army might go in, that would indicate that the Israeli intelligence knows where the scuds are, these mobile scuds. Wouldn't that make more sense than to share this information with the United States and the coalition?
Well, Israel has said that at least a few days ago that it was perfectly satisfied with the level of cooperation and exchange of information. And Israeli leaders seem to be pleased with any notification of the U.S. raid, the first one on Baghdad. Unable to tell from this point here in Tel Aviv what the communications are like on the political side. Here, we're sort of dodging the missiles and, scrambling hour by hour.
Well, Richard, do you get the impression that the Israelis have confidence in the United States to, in fact, deliver on finding these Scud sites?
I think there is still a good deal of confidence. I think the feeling is that perhaps, a few more days, as the spokesman for the Israeli defense said, a few more days of these attacks, and I think some people think that they can wait it out. But again, there's no way to tell what might happen if the Israeli Air Force goes in. The spokesman said that the Air Force is on high alert, the highest of all of the levels of the armed forces. There's been no call-up, no significant call-up of reservists that we are aware of. I think the people right now are just trying to eat, get through the day. We don't have that much access to that many people because they're in their homes. And a lot of the streets, all the streets are empty, and we're not perhaps able to always go to every single area after these attacks. So there's been no groundswell either way yet of the people.
Well, one thing that's puzzled me is, and I want to ask some of the gentlemen here, one thing that's puzzled me is the fact that there has not been the use of chemicals or nerve gas. Why do you think that is?
It seems that these Scud missiles are operating at the very limit of their range, and that the conventional warhead has itself been cut down. Now, it may be they can't get a chemical warhead into the lower payload, as it were. It may also be that they're holding back in Iraq for the possibility of escalating to chemical warfare later.
Is it also possible that that's really a paper tiger, that in fact they don't really have the threat of delivering to Israel?
I think before these attacks, most people in the intelligence community had a disagreement on whether the Iraqis have these capabilities. During the Iran-Iraq war, they never put chemical warheads in their missiles. They used it in artillery and in conventional in jets. But I doubt whether that they have those abilities, and I'm struck also by the failure of these missiles to deliver, really.
Well, the missiles are really, in missileology, these are really old-fashioned, very cumbersome white elephant kind of missiles. Doesn't it really demonstrate that perhaps Iraq does not have the formidable military hardware that a lot of people thought that the country had?
Well, I think maybe we have been overestimating Iraqi military capability for a while, because if you look very thoroughly at the history of the 8-year war with Iran, you see that, especially on the offensive, they are not very capable and not very eager to go on offensive. As far as the missiles are concerned, here I would not rule out that they still can deliver these chemicals, but in the first instance, the attacks of yesterday and today might just be an attempt to target properly, to find out how accurate the missiles are, as not to waste the few chemical warheads they have.
I think really the purpose here is political and psychological.
Well, first of all, it's psychological to show we can do it. We can hit Tel Aviv.
To show first that we are going to deliver on our threats, to break up the Arab members from the alliance, and also to mobilize support for him, because he has to prove that he can stand up and fight. The point is, with each passing day, his ability is going to diminish, and since those missiles did not really prove to be powerful, many people are going to say, where is the military punch?
Let's take a break here. I want to come back and I want to talk about the Pandora's box here. Israel seems to be the key to opening the Pandora's box. And we'll return and we'll probably again start with you, Richard Roth, in Tel Aviv, so stay with us. Welcome back to International Correspondents. We're joined here in Washington by Hisham Melhem, who writes for the Lebanese newspaper Asafir, Martin Walker, Washington correspondent for The Guardian of Great Britain, and Mario Diedrichs of Germany's Stern magazine, and via satellite from a Tel Aviv rooftop, CNN's Richard Roth. And Richard, we've been starting out with you for obvious reasons. You're there on the front line, so to speak. Is there a bit of skepticism beginning to emerge in Israel about the ability to deliver chemical weapons or gas?
I don't think so. Again, within the hour, the Israeli defense spokesman said just because they have not used them so far doesn't mean they don't have them. I don't think anyone here is counting out the possibility of chemical weapons attacks. Certainly when you're in a shelter or when you're in a sealed room and 50 to 100 people are breathing heavily and using gas masks and you can't identify who's even sitting right next to you and you can barely talk, I don't think anyone is counting out the possibility. There are enough alarms going off and strange sounds that can just startle anyone. The fear is so great here, nobody is counting them out. The Israeli military spokesman also said that Israel is not counting out the possibility of fuel bombs from Iraqi aircraft or raids by other Iraqi jet planes. This is what he has said just this morning. Nothing is being counted out from Saddam Hussein, the man who promised to hit Tel Aviv first. He's lived up to that promise. Who knows what's next?
Well, is there a fear among the people who you talk to that this could go into uncharted territory, some sort of conflagration that we can't even anticipate, particularly if Israel is dragged in?
I think there is that concern, but it is quite remarkable. Here you have a country that's been hit by several missiles in the last 2 days, and there has been no response, the type of restraint I'm not sure other countries might have. And so far, Israel has not moved in, and I think some people here are in favor of that policy. It's still, I don't think you're going to find any movement one way or the other yet. People are just hiding out.
The hiding out meaning just literally hiding out, correct?
That's right. I mean, I don't know what they're eating or what they're drinking, but they bought it beforehand. I mean, you don't see many people out on the streets. And we're now talking 2 days, or what seems like 3 days almost.
This is...
so if people... Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask the gentleman here, this is not characteristic of Israel. The whole demeanor of Israel is being, don't mess with us or else you're going to pay a maximum price. What do you think is behind this?
Well, I think what's behind it has been the last 2 years of cooling relations between Washington and Israel. And suddenly there's an opportunity for Tel Aviv to reforge the old special relationship with Washington. And we've seen in the last couple of days an astonishing rebuilding of some of those links. We've seen Jim Baker telephoning the Israeli ambassador 12 hours in advance of the war to say that the war was going to be coming. We've seen an astonishing revival of the old military intelligence links between the Pentagon and the Israeli Defense Forces. And the real question now, I think, is going to be what will be the price that Israel exacts for its restraint from the Americans.
And I think they will extract the price. I mean, you know, it was not a coincidence yesterday for the president to go publicly thanking the Israelis, praising their restraint. So obviously there will be a price, political concessions from the United States if the Israelis decide in the final analysis not to attack.
Richard, from your vantage point in Israel, do you share the point of view you're hearing here?
I definitely think that Israel is, at the moment, winning valuable points with the U.S. and who knows how many other countries, perhaps even some countries which are long-standing enemies. The country is solidly holding firm on this. Morale seems to be high. You hear a lot of jokes, even in the sealed rooms and the shelters. One man said the Israelis love the pressure, and that's when they function best. And so far, Tel Aviv is standing, and Israel seems to be making it through this. The question is, how many more nights can this go on before Air Force jets from Israel streak across Jordan, and then who knows into what kind of predicament this region?
It seems that the consensus here is that the best response, the most assertive response by Israel, is no response.
Well, that would certainly bring them the highest political returns, I would imagine, not just in Washington, but also in the possibility of gaining more gratitude among some of the old conservative Arab states, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait.
Is it fair, perhaps, this time to discuss an effect of Israel as aggressively passive?
Well, as long as they're passive, they're not aggressive. So I don't want to
I understand.
that,
obviously, it was a play on words. My point being here that they do their most, they're most assertive by sitting back in the moment, letting others do their work.
I mean, retaliation in the past used to have a deterrent effect against Palestinian attacks from Lebanon or whatever. But in this case, I just don't see any political or military sense in it.
What are they going to do that the United States and the other countries are doing? I mean, we have hundreds of sorties against Iraqi targets. What are the Israelis going to add to that?
Yes, and as Martin said, they win the advantage that then the Americans have to be grateful for the Israelis not getting into the act, not spoiling the coalition, and not extending this
I think in the end they will win. I mean, they will win politically, and they will win probably strategically with the United States.
When this war is over, it's very clear that there's going to be some kind of Middle Eastern peace conference, because that's what the Arab allies now expect and demand from the U.S. But at that point, Israel will go along to America and present its IOU and say, well, if there's going to be a conference, we want the following conditions. That conference must be with Americans in the chair, and it must not include the PLO.
That's the real tragedy. After the end of this war, you will have two Arab countries destroyed. Israel will become in a better position. Even if you assume that there will be an international conference, the Israelis will tell the United States, look, we played a constructive role, don't ask us for concessions.
We're back to Israel right now. They're bringing up the possibility here of what happens after the war. Do you have a perception there of anybody making plans for that?
No, I think everyone's making plans literally for the next hour here. This is too fluid a situation. And, you know, in the Middle East, everyone will, of course, tell you that minute by minute it could change. And I think Israel could expect to win points or an IOU from the United States, but who knows what's going to happen in any of the occupied territories, similar to what happened a couple of months ago with the shootings of Palestinians, and the whole thing could change. So Israel may not want to not retaliate and then wait around hoping for the payback, which might never come.
Okay, well, let's take a break right here, and then we'll return to you, Richard, in just a moment. Because it's the most immediate news, we've been spending most of our time talking about Israel, but I'd like to ask each of our guests about the overall war and the very basic question. We now have a situation where we've gone from euphoria to what appears to be American jets and others making the rubble bounce. How long is this going to go on? Is this going to be short, or are we going to have a long, tough war ahead?
Well, we're no longer in a simple Gulf war. We're now into the second front of a much wider Middle Eastern war. And I think that pretty soon we might see a third front opening in the streets and the souks of Arab cities, where these tensions between the Arab masses and their leaders are being played upon by Saddam Hussein's missiles. Even if it's a short war, it's going to be a long, hard peace after it.
I fully agree. I think it's going to draw out for weeks. I think with each passing day you have this dichotomy of Iraq being weakened militarily, but he will be making inroads in among the Arab masses, and I wouldn't be surprised if what you saw today in Algeria will be a sign of things to come.
As far as the war itself is concerned, I think that one of the great German strategist Clausewitz said that before you enter into a military conflict, be clear about your objectives. And here, there's still some muddling about the objectives. I think that the United States and its coalition entered into a tunnel without seeing the end, really. So I think that the war itself will be very long. The strength of Iraq is endurance. even under massive attack. And then in the end, there has to be a ground war. If you want to liberate Kuwait, we hear that the Iraqis have dug in Kuwait, they have mined the whole city, and it's going to be quite a messy affair, I'm afraid.
Richard, you've heard some real dismal perspectives here. It must be even more dismal from your vantage point in Israel.
Right, it sounds like we're all not going to be getting much sleep in the next month and a half, but one Israeli military official said within the hour, he said Israel has been subjected to many types of attacks from 48 to 91, and Israel has been involved in all kinds of wars, but he said, quote, this is a new war now, but he said he is confident Israel will be able to overcome it. I don't know how many more days Israel will allow missiles to come hurtling into the heart of major cities before responding, though.
But what about the concept that no matter how the war goes, there's going to be relentless pressure on Israel to somehow make accommodations that it has so far been unwilling to make?
I think Israel knows it's going to have an unbelievable job in that area on how to finesse and handle that. They've been even saying that, obviously, even before the conflict broke out. It may just depend on how it ends, and certainly if Israeli jets participate now in raids on Iraqi missile sites, it's going to make it that much more difficult for an overall peace, the kind of peace that in this region Israel would like. Certainly they would prefer direct negotiations and will do anything possible to avoid a large conference.
I'd like to thank you very much, Richard Roth, for your contribution from the rooftop in Tel Aviv. I'd like to thank our guests here in Washington, and thank you for joining us for the International Correspondents.
CNN.
Good day. Continuing our coverage of the war in the Gulf, I'm Molly McCoy.
And I'm Rick Moore. U.S. Marine officers estimate that 40 Iraqi soldiers were killed by U.S. planes and helicopter gunships in occupied Kuwait. The attacks yesterday were on an Iraqi artillery battery and a mortar position, and they followed Iraqi shelling on Thursday that wounded 3 Marines and a Navy corpsman in northern Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, an aide to the Israeli Prime Minister says Israel will respond to the second Iraqi missile attack in as many days. Israel, though, is not saying when or how it will respond. CNN's Charles Crawford reports on the missile barrage and the possible reaction to it.
Rescue workers sift through rubble from the latest Iraqi attack. Israel's most populous city hit for the second time in 2 days. Early reports say at least 10 people injured. So far, there are no reports of deaths.
This is one of the most congested and poor areas of the city. For the rocket to look for an empty spot and dig a crater, we're all very grateful. The windows have been shattered, water mains have burst, but no lives have been lost as yet.
Authorities say several missiles struck Tel Aviv. All carried conventional warheads. Baghdad radio says Iraq fired 11 missiles at what it called the enemy. The immediate question, will Israel fire back?
Someone has got to do something, and I think that this is a primary responsibility for the Israeli government to protect its own citizens.
The latest attack results in part from the failure of U.S. airstrikes to take out Iraq's mobile Scud missiles. After the first Iraqi attack on Israel early Friday, knocking out the Scuds became a priority. But at least some of the U.S. fighter planes assigned to that duty were unable to carry out attacks today because of heavy cloud cover. U.S. officials can only claim to have knocked out 6 mobile launchers, and they do not know how many remain.
Our defense people are in touch.
The strike today is a setback for President Bush, who yesterday condemned the initial Iraqi attack on Israel. The president had assured the Israelis the U.S. was doing all it could to wipe out the remaining Iraqi missiles. But for some Israeli officials, a promise is not enough.
We have said from the start that if attacked, we'll respond. We have been attacked. We will respond.
An Israeli retaliation could widen the Persian Gulf War. In neighboring Jordan, officials say they will try to shoot down Israeli warplanes if they cross Jordanian airspace on the way to Iraq. The immediate concern in Washington is to keep Arab nations like Syria attached to the anti-Iraqi alliance. But if Israel retaliates against Iraq, holding the coalition together could become very difficult. Charles Crawford, CNN, reporting.
British officials said today British warplanes have bombed Scud missile sites in Iraq and in Kuwait. Defense Secretary Tom King told reporters in London British reconnaissance planes zeroed in on previously undetected targets.
We have had also during the night the first deployment of the Tornado GR-1A, the reconnaissance version, which has flown an extremely successful reconnaissance missions during the night. They have, among others, identified a further mobile Scud missile and certain other camouflage targets, which will now be the subject of further attention.
As reported, Iraq fired Scud missiles at Israel today, the second attack in as many days.
Let's go live now to Tel Aviv, Israel, for the latest from the site of that second missile barrage. CNN's Richard Roth, a bit weary from staying up since it happened with his reports every hour, joins us again. Richard?
Yes, good morning. The sun is out, and that's certainly very comforting to many residents of this city. The fear is certainly considerably greater at night. Naturally, that's when the air raid sirens have sounded. And now this morning, the sun had come up just a little bit, and that's when the latest Iraqi missile attack occurred. Some people thought the coast was clear, you might say, and those who woke up early thought that the worst was over for the night, nothing had happened, and that perhaps all the Scud launchers had been attacked. But that was not so. We had at least 3 missiles come hurtling into Israel and strike targets in various areas, including Tel Aviv. Property damage was there in some buildings, and at least 10 people were reported injured, though those injuries were minor. They were rushed to hospitals. You could see Israeli men in chemical weapon suits reporting into various sectors, but these weapons that were used were conventional weapons. Now, within the hour, Ahmed Shai, a brigadier general, a spokesman for the Israeli Defense Force, briefed reporters on what was happening. He said that Iraq is clearly trying to drag Israel into this conflict. He said it wouldn't work, but he also said that Israel does reserve the right to protect itself. He said that the Iraqis are desperate. He said that their motivation is low, and that the lower it goes, the greater their willingness to attack Israel. The Israeli defense spokesman also said that he expects more missiles in the coming days, which is not exactly the kind of news the hundreds of thousands of this Mediterranean city want to hear. And Ahmed Shai also talked to journalists about the missiles. He said they were long-range weapons fired from western Iraq. He said something about the type of weapons. He said they were conventional, but he also said that that doesn't mean the worst is over regarding any potential chemical weapons attack.
Although all missiles being launched to Israel so far had only conventional warheads, we should expect the Iraqi to use chemical weapons as well. The fact that they haven't used any chemical warhead doesn't mean they don't have it.
Number 3 next. He also said it's a new war. He said that Israel has fought in many of them since 1948, but that this time the tactics were different, and Israel will overcome this. As for other areas which concern greatly the journalists here, he again warned everyone not to give out information and specific details regarding where these attacks took place in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. He said that the Iraqis are listening and watching, and he had a word of caution for the journalists.
I would like to urge you very much not to give any additional information where those missiles hit. If any one of you would like to commit suicide, I urge you very much to do it out of the country.
Now, the military spokesman said that they are also worried about fuel bombs coming in, and also the possibility of Iraqi aircraft. He said the Israeli Air Force remains on extremely high alert for all possibilities. The streets of Tel Aviv again remain empty as hundreds of thousands are indoors and following their government orders, and they've been told to listen to the radio for any updates. And of course, anyone who is out on the street is carrying a brown box, carrying a gas mask. Richard Roth, CNN, reporting live from Tel Aviv.
Richard, before you go, the key to keeping Israel out of this war, of course, seems to be at this point at least getting those Scud missile launchers. A senior French military official this morning said that warplanes had bombed 10 out of 40 Iraqi mobile Scud-B missile launchers on Thursday and early Friday, as well as most of the Iraqi fixed missile sites. There's still apparently some 20 or 30 of the mobile launchers available. Are you hearing anything about the numbers and the success in knocking them out?
No, we're not hearing about that. One Israeli official did say, how long can Israel go, how long can it go before telling its citizens that the coalition planes have not fulfilled their mission? I think Israel certainly is willing to give it a little bit more time, apparently, in that regard. I think everyone is expecting more attacks. The fear is still great here, and the Israeli defense spokesman said more missiles are very possible in the next few days.
All right, Richard, thanks so much. Richard Roth reporting live from Tel Aviv. Molly?
CNN's Gene Randall is monitoring the search for the Scuds from the Pentagon in Washington. Gene, are you being given a more exact idea of Iraq's Scud capability?
Good morning, Molly. Well, the second night of Iraqi Scud missile hits in Israel has certainly kept the focus on the difficulty of knocking out Iraq's remaining mobile launchers, and that number could be in the dozens. And there is little doubt that hitting those launchers continues to be a top priority of the U.S.-led air war against Iraq. Meanwhile, the Pentagon overnight released the names of 4 more U.S. airmen whose planes were shot down by the Iraqis. Listed as missing, 2 Air Force majors, Thomas Koritz and Donnie Holland, who were flying an F-15E, a state-of-the-art fighter plane involved in its first combat ever, and 2 Navy pilots, Lieutenants Robert Wetzel and Jeffrey Zahn, who were operating a carrier-based A-6 Intruder. Theirs was the second A-6 to fall. The numbers could change during a briefing later this morning in Saudi Arabia, but so far, the U.S. military says it has lost 4 planes in the air war against Iraq, and that the Allies have lost another 4. The Navy, meanwhile, says it has spotted mines floating off Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, and is warning the merchant ships in the area to stay out of the Persian Gulf because of the obvious risk. Also, overnight, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney declared an airlift emergency, authorizing the government to order the use of another 180 civilian airliners for the transport needs of Operation Desert Storm. On the continuing air bombardment of Iraq and Kuwait, Pentagon sources told CNN Friday night the air war would be carried on into February before there is any full-scale ground assault by the U.S.-led coalition. Finally, this morning, the Defense Department is putting out the word it needs to limit the kind of mail being sent to servicemen and women in Operation Desert Storm. Families and friends will be told they should no longer send packages, but should limit personal mail to first-class letters and audio cassettes until further notice. Gene Randall, CNN Live at the Pentagon.
All right, thanks, Gene. Let's go now to the White House, where Frank Sesno is standing by. Frank, the president is at Camp David. Notwithstanding that, do we know what he knows about what Israel may do?
Well, I don't know how much he knows about what Israel may do. They have requested that Israel lay low, but according to senior officials here, the U.S. has received no commitments, no guarantees as to what Israel's response may be. The president was awakened periodically throughout the night by his national security advisor, Brent Scowcroft, with updates of the latest missile attack against Israel. Pentagon briefers will be going to Camp David later in the day. Included in that briefing will be the vice president, the national security advisor. Also, the Israeli response, though, now is seen as inevitable. The question really is when, where, and how. A source said yesterday that further attacks by Iraq, that is to say before last night's most recent Scud attack against Israel, would be certain to trigger an Israeli response. Very high-level discussions, I must point out, have led up to this moment. Discussions throughout the coalition. And the feeling has been that as long as Israel responded proportionately, and as long as it was attacked first, the coalition could withstand an Israeli response as long as it was a proportionate response. That being said, there are ominous signals out of Syria today. The information ministry there saying vaguely that if Israel attacks any Arab country, Syria will side with it. So the big question mark within the coalition remains Syria. Syria has ground forces in the coalition stationed very close to the Kuwaiti border. President yesterday praised Israeli restraint, but he also acknowledged its need to defend its civilian centers. The key to all of this business is the Scuds, which we are told are under constant attack. President Bush yesterday referred to what he called the darndest search and destroy missions, but he also acknowledged that Iraq still has Scuds, still has chemical weapons. An official here late yesterday estimated that about half the Iraqi Scuds remained, about half have been taken out. The administration believes Saddam clearly still has cards in his deck, still intends to play them. Some of them are very dangerous. The whole situation very unpredictable and very unwelcome at this point. We'll be following the situation from here throughout the day. I'm Frank Sesno, CNN, reporting live from the White House.
Thanks, Frank. Bomber runs to Iraq, a dangerous, nerve-shattering mission under the best of circumstances. But in the first wave of the Gulf War, F-16 and F-15 crew members also had to contend with the weather. More on the 4th Tactical Fighter Wing in this pool report by James Hattori.
For the second day in a row, squadrons of F-16s deployed on sorties to Iraq returned to base with a nearly full load of 1-ton bombs. On a day when the Allied commander was on the air reporting an 80% mission success rate, National Guard pilots from New York and South Carolina were among the frustrated minority, their bombing runs thwarted by the weather.
How was the weather? Terrible. Yeah, it's pretty well solid clouds all the way up to about 35,000. Can't get into the target areas at all.
F-16 ground crew members, still exhilarated in these first days of the war, found discretion the better and safer part of battle.
So far, everything that's gone out of here has gone up. So far, everything's come back.
Just down the tarmac, pilots from returning F-15 Strike Eagles, the latest all-weather fighter bombers, hinted at continued progress in taking out Iraqi Scud missiles.
It's just another day on the job for the Scud busters. That's about all we can say. Oh, this is going good. Today went real well. After about 7 hours of combat time, we're going to go home and relax a while, get ready for another day.
For most of the pilots, this is their first taste of combat, the exhilaration. Today, they tasted the bitter, too. One of the F-15s did not return from its mission this morning. Its pilot and weapons officer missing in action.
We all feel bad that we have an airplane missing. At the same time, no one has lost focus or their focus on the fact that they still have a big job to do, as we all do. And I see fire in their eyes and a highly motivated fighting force here. Still one with remorse that someone is still out there possibly trying to walk back. And the airplane didn't come back, but still the focus is there in its entirety.
The F-15s were back in the air tonight. Remorse on hold. The war still ahead. James Hattori with the 4th Tactical Fighter Wing, Central Saudi Arabia.
In our continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf this Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we will be going live to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia for the latest military briefing from officials of the coalition there.
Also yet to come in our Gulf coverage, we'll be talking about an extremely advanced weapon. That is the F-117 stealth fighter. A military expert will be our guest. Stay tuned. CNN's Rick Salinger is in eastern Saudi Arabia. He's here to talk about a possible way out of that war zone. Rick?
Well, I suppose you could look at it that way. If you look behind me here at this airbase, on the flight line right now preparing to take off is a Hawaiian air jet. That is one of the civilian aircraft that Gene Randall mentioned a short time ago from the Pentagon, being requisitioned by the Department of Defense, used to transport troops and equipment here to Saudi Arabia. More are being requisitioned in order to take part in the upcoming operations. It is not a way out, however, for the civilians, but plans are being made for them. We are told here in eastern Saudi Arabia, for those U.S. civilians and their dependents, military flights will be taking place in the coming days to get them out of here if they so choose. Now, this is not a mandatory evacuation. In fact, they aren't referring to it as an evacuation at all. The words being used by the U.S. Consul General here in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, are voluntary departure. And those U.S. citizens who are interested in taking part in it are urged to contact the U.S. Consul here. Meantime, a much different type of plane is continuing to take off into the skies and go deep into Iraq, perhaps even into Baghdad, to continue bombing missions. Among those that have been leading the way are the F-111s of the 48th Tactical Fighter Wing. We've had the opportunity through pool reports now to speak with several of the pilots involved, including Captain Matt Warren.
I don't know if it was any different than what we trained for. Just having the threat vector, being over enemy territory, knowing that if we had a problem, we're at 200 miles from friendly territory, and if there's no landing areas around, the only way out is to either fly out or punch out. And we didn't want to eject over enemy territory. And that's kind of a weird feeling, kind of a tightness, something that's not real comfortable.
These are two-seater multi-purpose fighters. They're medium range with deep penetration abilities. They have electronic reconnaissance and terrain-following radar to aid the pilots in flying extremely low to evade the enemy radar detection. They've been encountering, however, surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery, but have made it back intact. However, not all of the U.S. and multinational coalition fighters have been able to come back safely. In fact, word is today that 2 more U.S. planes, an F-15 and also an A-6, each with 2-man crews, are unaccounted for at this hour. We expect to hear more information on that coming up in about 3 hours' time with the briefing from Central Command in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So as the war continues, so do the casualties as they mount, and the jitters are rising as well. Live from eastern Saudi Arabia, I'm Rick Salinger, CNN.
All right, Rick Salinger, thank you from Saudi Arabia. And Francis Hardin is standing by at the State Department now. Francis, as I'm sure you just heard, Rick Salinger reporting the prospects of an airlift of U.S. citizens and dependents out of Saudi Arabia. What are they saying at State?
This offer to help Americans leave Saudi Arabia is not exactly new. It has been on the books more or less for about a week, since January 11th, when that travel advisory was put out. Many of the Americans in the eastern provinces of Saudi Arabia work for the Saudi oil company. They are now being offered a chance to leave if they wish, since, as Rick points out, the U.S. government cannot order civilians to do so. Commercial flights were canceled even before the outbreak of hostilities. So the U.S. government now, through the State Department, will guarantee the insurance coverage of U.S. flag carriers. And those who wish to leave are being told that the airfare could be as high as 50% more because of that higher insurance premium rate. Also, the destination of the flights is being kept secret, but it is likely that it will be Europe, and people are being told if they want to come back to the United States from there, their ongoing flight is their own affair. Also, if they don't have the money, they will have to sign a promissory note to the U.S. government. Now, in Beirut, the U.S. embassy there has been closed temporarily because of fear of an Arab backlash because of the Persian Gulf War. The ambassador, Ryan Crocker, and his staff flew to Cyprus after Palestinian and Arab extremists threatened to avenge the U.S.-led airstrikes on Iraq. That embassy in Beirut, of course, was bombed in 1984 in a suicide attack by pro-Iranian extremists. I'm Francis Hardin, CNN, live from the State Department.
All right, Francis. Radar-evading F-117A warplanes are among the new weapon systems being used in attacks on Iraq. Let's look at some of the videotape of these stealth fighters released by the U.S. Air Force.
It's a fantastic airplane. And again, I think if you'll go back and look at past discussions about the F-117, I think the record stands for itself. And it has certainly demonstrated its value. There's an even greater feeling of satisfaction and reward when you see something that's much bigger than an individual, whether it be yourself or any one person in the unit, to watch the unit address its assigned mission and accomplish that assigned mission, and watch the pride just emulate in everyone in the unit. They were well equipped, they were well trained, and certainly capable, and had demonstrated that a number of times to perform.
Joining us in our Washington bureau now to share his perspective on the war in the Gulf is CNN's military analyst, James Blackwell. Good morning, Mr. Blackwell. Could you share your experience first with us? We just saw those dramatic pictures and very impressive reports of the stealth. We're hearing there, what, 2,000 sorties a day, 80% effective. Is the stealth taking credit for a lot of that?
Well, of course, I don't have an awful lot of experience with the stealth itself. It's been a very highly protected secret airplane up until not too long ago. It was, in fact, its existence wasn't even admitted until 1989. It was used in the Panama invasion in December of 1989. It was developed in a laboratory called the Skunk Works, kind of descriptive of the sort of work that it does in developing these super secret aircraft. It's called stealth or low observable because its engine is of a new design, its geometric shape, its construction materials, electronic boxes, even the paint on the surface contributes to reducing the radar signature of this airplane, and some have claimed that it makes it look like a little bird to radar scopes. It flies at night. It delivers very precise weapons onto its target. Its flight controls are computerized. Because of the new design, it's relatively unstable unless it has these special computer controls. The commanders are so confident in the capabilities of this aircraft, even though the reports were somewhat critical after Panama, that nearly all of America's stealth fighters have been deployed to Saudi Arabia. All of us analysts will, of course, be watching it very closely to see how effective it turns out to be. Those reports of its effectiveness will certainly influence upcoming budgetary decisions on other stealth-type aircraft, such as the Advanced Tactical Fighter.
It's a fantastic.
All right, James, we're hearing you and others talk about the effectiveness of the stealth. Are you seeing anything at this point in time that is not effective in our air attack operation?
The Pentagon is guarding the details of the battle damage assessment reports very, very closely. When they say that 80% of the aircraft have been effective, that simply means that 8 out of 10 of the airplanes sent into Saudi Arabia arrived at their targets, and the pilots or the cameras observed their bombs hitting their targets. What we don't know is why the other 20% did not. It may be because of weather, or it may be because of problems with the airplane. When those reports are finalized and confirmed and rolled up, the engineers and the analysts will have a chance to evaluate the performance of each type of aircraft.
All right, evaluate, if you would, sir, the effectiveness of the coalition air forces in trying to find and destroy those Scud missile launchers.
Well, of course, we aren't being told just exactly how effective. But the fact that they are finding several within 24 hours of those launchers first showing up, and we're getting confirmed kills on numbers like 3 and now 6, indicates to me that the effectiveness is going to be quite good. Given that Saddam Hussein has only a few dozen, most of us have estimated about 30 to 40, we can expect that within a few days, all of them will be located and destroyed.
We had a report this morning that there were 50 fixed launch sites and some 40 mobile sites for launchers, or 40 mobile launchers. Can you collaborate those figures?
Those are consistent with the range of estimates that independent analysts have been suggesting that Iraq has had. And again, it's very difficult for us here in Washington and elsewhere to be quite precise on those kinds of numbers. 50 fixed site is probably a little low according to the numbers that I've seen, and 40 is probably a little high in terms of the numbers of mobile sites, but it's within the range of most estimates.
But some of them are still there.
Some of them are still there.
Thanks for being with us again. CNN's military analyst, James Blackwell. Molly?
CNN has just learned that Jordan's King Hussein has scheduled a press conference for 8 a.m. Eastern. That is about a half an hour from now. We are efforting live coverage of that, and we hope to go live to Jordan at the top of the hour. Right now, stay with us as our Gulf coverage continues.
This is CNN.
An update now on developments in the Persian Gulf War. British warplanes have been bombing Scud missile sites this morning in Iraq and occupied Kuwait. Those bombings follow the second Iraqi missile attack in as many days on Israel. Several Scud missiles fell on Israel this morning, causing minor injuries to 17 people in the Tel Aviv area. Israel said it would respond to the attacks, but did not say when or how. The Syrian information minister said Syria would fight alongside any Arab nation attacked by Israel. Meantime, U.S. Marines in Saudi Arabia estimate their planes and helicopters have killed 40 Iraqi soldiers in occupied Kuwait. That attack was a response to Iraqi shelling that wounded 3 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman.
Arab Americans are agonizing over the Allied attacks on Iraq. CNN's Sean Calebs reports on their reactions and hopes and prayers for peace.
There's no shortage of phone calls. This radio broadcast from New York is called Arabesque, allowing its audience, mostly Arab Americans, to voice opinions. The discussion zeroes in on the Gulf War.
You're not behind the president, then?
I'm not behind this action. No, I'm not.
Many callers don't support the U.S. action. Others target Saddam Hussein.
If we let, and excuse my French,
No,
if
okay.
we let that bastard walk all over us now, it affects the entire world for a lot of years to come. And thank God for what they're doing right now.
But every time Allied fighter jets streak toward their target, and every bomb blast in Iraq hits home with many Arab Americans.
They are watching, fearfully watching, the disaster occurring in their eyes, in front of their eyes, and there is nothing that they can do.
This man's father is from Iraq.
So he's very, very upset about it. He badly wanted for the U.S. not to go ahead and take a first strike against Iraq.
And now some Arab Americans, like this man in California, are experiencing hostilities.
I have been personally, and my wife have been exposed to the hatred feelings among the Americans here. And, you know, it's not a very good feeling.
Security at mosques around the U.S. has been increased. Arab anti-discrimination organizations say hate crimes against people of Arab descent are increasing. Many come here seeking solace and peace of mind. Many others are praying for peace on earth.
I feel strongly that civilians must not be attacked, whether they are in Israel or they are in Kuwait or they are in Iraq or they are in the United States anyway. That's my opinion.
Some are thinking about Saddam Hussein. They believe he is carrying the torch for the Palestinians and back the Iraqi leader with heart and soul.
I support Saddam Hussein 100%. Whatever he do, he's standing up for the Palestinian people.
Still others try not to choose a side. They just hope and pray the bloodshed ends soon. Sean Caleb, CNN, reporting.
The news from Baghdad may be sparse in the future. Iraqi authorities today ordered all international journalists out of Iraq. Among those packing to leave are the CNN journalists led by correspondent Peter Arnett. He reported earlier this morning on the expulsion order, and he was questioned by Patrick Emery.
We have restored CNN communications with the outside world from Baghdad, as you can hear, but it may be the final report because all of the international press corps here has been ordered to leave Iraq. We are in the 3rd day of the air war directed against the Iraqi capital and elsewhere in Iraq and Kuwait by the multinational Armada. The frequent airstrikes against Baghdad continued overnight. The destruction is gradually altering the skyline of the Iraqi capital. Traffic in the streets of the city today seems mainly official vehicles. Most of the population is either staying indoors or already they've evacuated to safer locations in the country. The Minister of Information, Latif Jassin, last night met with the nearly 40 members of the International Press Corps and asserted that Iraq is confident it can withstand the multinational air assault and eventually win victory. The minister was relaxed as he spoke with reporters. He asserted that what he called the electronic war launched against Iraq by President Bush will not succeed. He said that President Bush is, quote, under the illusion that he can score a quick and easy victory against Iraq with such tactics, unquote. The Iraqi official said that President Bush has not reckoned with the Iraqi people's willingness to fight with faith in God, he said, and faith in Saddam Hussein. Now, this morning, orders have come for the press corps to depart from Baghdad, and as of now, they're starting to dismantle the satellite communications. As of this report, the nearly 40 journalists here are packing their bags and assembling cars for the trip to the Jordanian border. This is Peter Arnett, CNN, reporting live from Baghdad.
Peter, I know it's delicate. Can I ask you a question?
It all depends. Ask the question, and I'll see if I can answer it.
All right, good enough. Let me start with this one. We reported that you may be allowed to return in 3 to 5 days. Why 3 to 5 days?
The Ministry of Information is saying that conditions in the hotel are not adequate for the press, that the hygienic conditions are poor, the water is limited, and they feel that it'll take some time to organize the locale here, organize the hotel to make it for this number of journalists to stay here. That is the reason they're giving. I have no other information about why it would be that period of time for us to return.
Can you tell? Would it be all right for you to describe the scene in Baghdad right now? What does the city look like?
Hello. Well, you know, as I said in my dispatch, the city remains quiet. There has been no panic here. From what we can see, there have been no civilian targets hurt by the bombing. Now, in the hotel, the press corps, I think, is generally disappointed that it is required to leave. We had basically settled down here. We'd learned to live with the danger, and we seemed happy enough, well, the colleagues that I know, to try to cover the Iraqi side of what's going on. This decision by the Iraqi government to send us out of the country was unexpected, and I think we are reluctant to go, but it looks as though we have no choice.
Again, that was CNN's Peter Arnett reporting, perhaps for the last time, from Baghdad this morning. Still ahead, we'll hear from CNN's John Holloman and Bernard Shaw, now safely in Amman, Jordan, after leaving Baghdad. That's just ahead on CNN.
CNN's Bernard Shaw and John Holloman are now in Amman, Jordan. They traveled from Baghdad to Amman by car, and last night described to viewers their feelings as the bombs started pounding Baghdad.
Imagine the best thing for us to do for our viewers, and others along the network line may have their own ideas about this, but is to talk about some of the pictures that we brought back with us. This is the view out of our CNN bureau in Baghdad, just looking out. There were still some lights on in the city of Baghdad at the beginning of the air raid. The Iraqis had several practices in weeks before about how to do a complete blackout, but well, you can see what happened. These pictures were taken just a few minutes after that blackout using a night scope camera, we believe, that Fabrice Moussas, the cameraman for ABC, was able to use. And you can see the tracer fire going up into the air there, one after the other. The tracers went up, but with every one that you could see like that, there are either 5 or 10 bullets that you can't see. So the anti-aircraft guns were really going wild, trying to hit the Allied coalition planes.
And what is deadly about what you're seeing and hearing is that for every round you see going in the air, it obviously has to come down. And one does not know how many Baghdadis were wounded or killed by anti-aircraft fire that returned to Earth once it had expired in its trajectory. On the streets of Baghdad, people just scampering, scurrying, trying to run for cover.
The sky was lit up like the 4th of July, Bertie. We mentioned this several times the night of this in our live coverage. It was, you know, it looked like a terrific fireworks show, but obviously these were fireworks that had death connected to them in some way.
On the horizon, when you see those knocks you had on the door, you had people coming to the door a lot. Who were they?
Sure, David. In the middle of the night, at one point, there were hotel security people who said it was their job to get us out of there and down into the bomb shelters down on the in the sub-basement of the hotel. And we obviously didn't want to do that. We wanted to be where we could find out from you what was going on and where we could report to you.
Look at the horizon on your screen. What you're watching there, in many instances, are the explosions of the bombs as they're hitting. And this sound, these sirens, are very eerie. Throughout the last 3 days, John, in Baghdad, in broad daylight, I have slept in my clothes for the last 2 days.
Absolutely. I remember, Bernie, I was on the communication system with CNN, and you had been on it for about 20 hours straight. You'd go down to lie down and get a little sleep, and another siren would come, some more anti-aircraft fire would come, and these huge, loud explosions out in the distance would occur. That's a revolving restaurant, by the way, that you saw there. It looks a little bit like a mushroom lit up by the blast of a bomb in the background.
Is that Peter saying this is it?
No, I think that's footage from another network. That's their reporter, I believe, or maybe one of their people out there. But you can see the sky lit up there with the anti-aircraft fire going up. We thought at the time we saw some aluminum or chaff that was put out by the American or the Allied planes
to jam radar,
to confuse the radar
and electronics. Yeah. Now that was a big hit there. That was a big hit.
You and I was standing in the window when that blast occurred, and I was forced back from the window.
Holloman and Shaw were part of a convoy out of Iraq, which included 3 other CNN employees. They say that on their way to Amman, they were stopped about 16 times by security forces.
Just a short time ago, we told you that Jordan's King Hussein has scheduled a press conference today. We now understand that that press conference should come at about 8:30 Eastern Time, and we will do our best to bring you the statements of Jordan's King Hussein at that time. We've also been detailing to you some press restrictions that are now affecting journalists in Israel. CNN's Tony Clark is in Amman, Jordan. Tony, I understand now that Jordanian officials are about to limit what CNN can do there. Can you tell us about that?
In fact, it is kind of a surprise, Molly. We just learned a short time ago that we are now prohibited, excuse me, from giving you any kind of television pictures, doing any kind of shooting from the roof of our hotel or any of the windows of our hotel that give you a high view over the city of Amman. And it is an unusual restriction because we are still allowed to go out on the streets and show you what it looks like on the streets, talk to people on the streets. We simply can no longer give you the kind of almost aerial view. For days, in fact, since this crisis began, we have been able to show you what Amman looks like from the roof of our hotel, and also because it's on a hill giving an overlook of the area. Sometimes that has allowed us to peek in on what appear to be the movements of the military, perhaps military helicopters, at one point some soldiers doing what appeared to be digging in. And so now, the night following the decision by Parliament to pass a resolution telling Muslims and telling Arabs around the world to strike out against U.S. interests, we are told we cannot show you any pictures, cannot show you anything from a high vantage point over Amman. Perhaps we will be able to get some clarification both on how long this is to last and the reason, other than the security reason we have been told. Be able to clarify a little bit of that when we hear from King Hussein a little bit later this morning. I'm sure that's one of the questions that some of the reporters will be asking. Up until now, as I say, we have had certain restrictions. We have had to get permission every day to go out around either the city of Amman or in various parts of Jordan to show you what's going on here. We have to tell the Ministry of Information where we want to go, what we want to shoot, and then get permission. When we have tried to go to the border with the occupied West Bank, we were allowed to go there, shoot pictures of the Israeli soldiers, but not the Jordanian soldiers. And so now what we're seeing is a little bit of further tightening of the restrictions, and hopefully a little bit later this morning we can get some clarifications on why that's being done and perhaps how long it will last. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live from Amman.
Thanks, Tony, for that. And still to come as our Gulf coverage continues, demonstrations for and against the war across the United States.